I have a tremendous amount of interest for anyone that has experienced the trials and tribulations of war. My favorite war to learn about is the Civil War. I think it is crazy that all of the most influential people of the time period were forced to pick a side, and then the two sides battled it out. To try and put this idea into perspective today seems nearly impossible. The people that seemingly have a lot of influence these days go nowhere near the battlefields, whereas in the Civil War the most influential people were leading the battle charges. One of these people was General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. This is a picture of General Jackson from web.mst.edu. The majority of the following information regarding Jackson's early years was taken from sonofthesouth.net. Jackson was born in Clarksburg, Virginia on January 21, 1824. He was rather poor growing up, but he was raised in good schools and always seemed to have a leadership mentality. He was raised in a rural environment and therefore was an excellent horseback rider. He participated in a cadetship at West Point. After graduating from West Point, he served in the Mexican War and was honored for his many acts of bravery. For example, he was promoted to major when he volunteered for the storming of Chapultepec in Mexico. However, a more important aspect of the Mexican War for Jackson was that this is where he found religion. Colonel Francis Taylor introduced him to God, and after studying the Bible for a number of years, he decided to join the Presbyterian Church. Don't get me wrong, it's not like he was a heathen before finding God. He lived a life following a strict moral path. However, this is just when he decided to allow God into his life. By the time the Civil War came around, Jackson had been out of the military circle for around 10 years. This being said, he was not known very well among his peers. However, it did not take long for Jackson to make a name for himself. According to xroads.virginia.edu, his tremendous leadership skills and refusal to back down were seen early and often. The Battle of Bull Run is where he earned his nickname Stonewall. In the middle of battle, Brigadier General Barnard E. Bee was observing Jackson and stated, "There is Jackson, standing like a stone wall." The fact that Jackson stood like a stone wall on the battlefield and was a tremendous strategist made him the most important asset to the Army of Northern Virginia and even the entire Confederate Army. However, it is extremely ironic that this asset that made Stonewall such a great soldier would ultimately lead to his downfall. On May 2, 1863, Stonewall Jackson was hit by friendly fire while trying to make a personal inspection of the situation on the battlefield. He had passed his own military lines to get a better vantage point, and Confederate troops thought him and his escorts were the enemy and fired upon them. He was shot by one of his own troops and died a few days later of pneumonia due to the gunshot wound. This is a sketch of the battlefield, and this is where Stonewall's troops began, and they encircled the Union troops, and this is the location at which he was shot by his own troops who thought he was the Union soldiers. No matter how ironic it is fitting that Jackson died in the heat of battle, fighting with men that he loved and would die for, while trying to instill the Stonewall mindset into the troops of the army that he served. It has been said many times that Jackson was a true Southern hero. I completely agree with this, not only because he was an amazing leader and strategist, but because according to the Dictionary of American Biography, he applied his faith to nearly all aspects of life and strictly observed the Sabbath throughout his life. There are two quotes that show the huge impact that Jackson had in the lives of his peers. The first is from Robert E. Lee himself, who stated, "I have lost my right arm." Shortly after Jackson's death, Robert E. Lee quoted this. Regardless of your views on the war, the fact that the leader of the Confederate Army said this about a man is a huge testament to who he was. The final quote and point that I will end my speech on comes from the statue erected in his honor in Lexington, Virginia. There is an inscription below the statue that reads, "For centuries, men will come to Lexington as a Mecca and to his grave as a shrine, and wonderingly talk of this man and his mighty deeds. Time will only add to his great fame. His name will be honored and revered forever."